My name is Renee Wallace, and for the longest time, I believed that being chosen by someone meant I was worthy of love. I was 28 when I met Caleb, and back then, I was convinced he was the answer to every unspoken prayer. I'd spent most of my 20s pouring myself into work. As a marketing strategist, I was determined to build a life where I didn't have to depend on anyone. But deep down, I still hoped I'd meet someone who'd see me, not just the professional, not just the ambitious woman, but the person who needed love, too. Caleb was that person, at least at first. I remember our first date like it happened yesterday. He took me to a small French bistro tucked between the old brownstones in Denver. He listened so intently I felt like the only woman alive. When I told him about my dreams, owning my own consulting firm one day, he didn't flinch. He looked right into my eyes and said, "You deserve everything you want." That night, he walked me to my car and kissed my forehead. He called me when he got home to make sure I was safe. I fell asleep thinking maybe I'd finally found someone who would never hurt me. The first months were a blur of roses and candle-lit dinners. Caleb was thoughtful in ways no one else had ever been. He memorized my coffee order. He learned the names of my coworkers. He sent flowers to my office just because. When he told me he loved me, it felt like an arrival. Like the world was finally unfolding the way I'd always hoped it would. We moved in together after 8 months. My friends said it was fast, but I couldn't see it. When you know, you know. That's what everyone says, right? In that first week in our new place, a craftsman bungalow with a porch big enough for rocking chairs, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. But looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment things began to shift. It was a small thing. Caleb asked me not to wear red lipstick when we went to dinner with his colleagues. He said it was too loud. I shrugged it off. One preference. What was the harm? But preferences turned into corrections. Corrections became rules. At the time, I didn't realize I was stepping into a trap. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel chosen, you'll understand how easily you ignore the small alarms. Because sometimes, love doesn't come as a hurricane. Sometimes it arrives as a soft voice telling you what to wear, how to speak, when to smile. And you don't notice the bars rising around you until it's almost too late. If part 1 was the dawn, part 2 was the long gray morning when I started to sense the shadows stretching over everything. In the first few months of living together, Caleb's preferences multiplied. At first, it was the clothes. He started setting aside outfits for me each morning, sweaters in soft pastels, dresses that reminded him of something sweet. I used to love wearing bold colors, bright lipstick, patterns that made me feel alive, but I told myself, it's just clothing. It doesn't matter. Then it was my hair. He didn't like when I wore it up in a bun. "You look severe," he'd say. "Leave it down for me." I was flattered at first that he noticed so many details, but slowly it stopped feeling like affection and started feeling like control. It wasn't only about how I looked. He began calling me at work. "Just to check in," he said. But the calls were constant. If I didn't pick up right away, my phone would light up with texts. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Call me back right now." I'd be in meetings, my palms damp, heart pounding because I knew what was waiting if I didn't respond quickly enough. My coworkers started to notice. My friend Sarah pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Is everything okay at home?" I forced a smile. "Oh, he just worries. He loves me a lot." She looked at me for a long time. I could tell she didn't believe me, but I needed to believe me, because the alternative was too frightening to admit. Around this time, I got the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years, lead strategist. It was everything I'd dreamed of. When my boss told me, I felt like I could finally breathe, like all those late nights and weekends had finally paid off. I drove straight home to share the news. I expected Caleb to sweep me into his arms, to tell me he was proud. But when I walked through the door, his face barely changed. "That's great," he said flatly. "But what does this mean for us? More hours? More travel?" I tried to explain. I told him it wouldn't change anything between us, that I'd still be home every evening, but he was already shaking his head. "You don't need to prove yourself anymore," he said. "You have me. You don't need their approval." I swallowed the lump in my throat. He didn't understand. This wasn't about approval. It was about my life, my goals, my independence. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed. He kissed my cheek and whispered, "I'm sorry if I upset you. I just want to take care of you." I wanted so badly to believe that was all it was. But in the weeks that followed, every success I shared seemed to push him further away. He started criticizing little things, how I stacked the dishes, how I folded the laundry. He said I was distracted, that I didn't care about our home. When I worked late, the calls increased. If I stayed more than an hour past 5, he would call every 15 minutes, his voice growing colder each time. "Are you with someone? I don't believe you're really working. You think I'm stupid?" I started taking calls in the stairwell so no one in the office would hear. I'd lean against the cold concrete wall, whispering reassurance while my heart beat so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Some nights, I sat in my car in the garage, keys in my lap, staring at the glow of our kitchen window. The thought of walking back into that house filled me with dread I couldn't explain. But I always did. I told myself this was love, this was devotion. But something inside me, something small and stubborn, was starting to whisper that it wasn't love at all. It was control, plain and simple. And each time I ignored that voice, the walls around me grew higher. I used to think the idea of someone watching you all the time was only in thrillers, that it couldn't happen to someone like me, someone educated, independent, sensible. But it did. It began with Caleb's suggestion that we get a security system. "Just cameras outside," he promised. "This neighborhood is getting worse." I was uneasy, but I nodded. He'd already worn me down with so many arguments about safety. If I disagreed, it always meant I didn't trust him, didn't care about our life together. But when the installation was done, there were more than just outdoor cameras. A tiny black lens in the living room, another near the stairs, one in the kitchen. I remember standing in the hallway, looking up at the blinking red light. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's for emergencies," he said smoothly. "What if you fall when I'm not home?" I wanted to scream that I wasn't elderly, that I didn't need to be watched. But I didn't. Because by then I had learned that disagreeing with Caleb never ended well. And part of me was still so desperate to keep the peace that I convinced myself it was harmless. Over time, it became clear the cameras weren't about emergencies. If I moved something in the house, like a vase or a pile of magazines, he'd comment on it before he even got home. If I left the kitchen messy while I worked late, he'd call me and say, "You're slipping." It was as though every moment of my day belonged to him. I started taking longer routes home to delay the inevitable. I would park at the grocery store, buy things I didn't need, and sit in the car pretending I had errands. Because being anywhere felt better than being there. One evening, after a long day of presentations, I stayed at the office until nearly 8. When I finally walked through the door, Caleb was waiting at the kitchen island. "Where were you?" "Work ran late," I said softly. He gestured to his phone. "You turned off your location." I had. Just for an hour. I'd wanted to feel like I still had something of my own. His face turned cold. "You don't get to shut me out." He walked over and set his hands on my shoulders. They were shaking. "You're my wife," he whispered, "and I deserve to know everything." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the girl I'd been when we first met. How she'd believed love meant transparency. How she'd thought vulnerability was romantic. And now, here I was, living in a house wired for surveillance, too afraid to even send a text without imagining he'd see it. Even my family began to notice something was wrong. My sister Claire came to visit one Saturday. She pulled me aside in the hallway and whispered, "You don't look like you anymore." I tried to smile, tried to brush it off. But the truth was, she was right. I had stopped seeing friends. I had stopped wearing anything he might disapprove of. I had stopped laughing at work because I was so tired, so consumed by fear. The day I realized I was living like a prisoner was the day I caught myself carefully deleting a grocery receipt. Not because I'd bought anything illicit, but because I knew he'd question why I spent $8 on a bottle of hand cream. That was the night I sat in the dark and whispered to myself over and over, "This isn't love. This isn't love. This isn't love." But saying it and believing it were two different things. Even then, I still clung to the hope that maybe he could change, that maybe, somehow, we could go back to the beginning. But the truth was, the beginning had never been real. It had always been the first step in his plan to own me. Sometimes the final straw isn't something dramatic. It isn't a slap or a shouted threat. It's a quiet moment when you look around your life and realize you don't belong in it anymore. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Thursday. I had stayed late at the office to finish a campaign presentation. It wasn't intentional. I was just lost in the work, enjoying the one place where I still felt competent and respected. When I finally checked my phone, there were 17 missed calls and a stream of messages. "Answer me. Where are you? Why are you doing this? You think I'm an idiot? Come home now." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I felt like a teenager caught sneaking out, except I was a grown woman with her own career. Her own life, wasn't I? That night, when I walked in the door, Caleb was waiting in the living room, arms folded over his chest. "Where were you?" I swallowed. "Work." "You turned off your location again." "I needed some space." My voice sounded small, even to me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Space? From your husband?" I tried to step past him, but he grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to make me freeze. "Don't you ever shut me out again?" he hissed. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do, because I was too exhausted to argue, because I had stopped believing anything I said would change him. After he finally let go, I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat down on the edge of the tub. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was limp, my eyes hollow. Who was this woman? Where had she gone? I thought of all the tiny compromises I'd made over the past 2 years, all the pieces of myself I'd traded away in the name of love, and for the first time, I let myself say the word I'd been avoiding: abuse. It wasn't just controlling. It wasn't just worry. It was abuse. Emotional, psychological, financial, every kind except the kind that leaves bruises you can photograph. I sat there until my legs went numb, and when I finally stood up, I knew something in me had shifted. I wasn't going to keep pretending. I wasn't going to keep hoping he would change. I was going to leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, planning. I made a list in my head: find a storage unit, get a new checking account, call my sister Claire, pack only what I needed. Every time I hesitated, I pictured the way his hand had closed around my wrist. I pictured the cameras blinking in the corners of the rooms. I pictured the woman in the mirror. And I knew if I didn't leave soon, I'd never get out. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My voice shook as I spoke to my manager. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. I I just need a day. She didn't ask questions, just said, take whatever time you need. When I hung up, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. The first time in months that I'd chosen myself over him. I waited until Caleb left for the office. He kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the contacts list. My finger hovered over Claire's name. For a moment, I thought about deleting it all, erasing the messages, pretending it was just another fight. But that part of me, the part that still wanted to protect him, was dying. I pressed call. When she picked up, I didn't even say hello. I'm leaving him, I whispered. There was a beat of silence. Then she said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And for the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe. When I hung up with Claire, I sat frozen at the kitchen table. For a moment, I was terrified I'd made everything up, that maybe I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. But then I looked around the house, at the cameras blinking their silent red judgment, at the carefully curated decor I hadn't chosen, at the locked cabinet where Caleb kept all the paperwork. And I knew this wasn't a life. It was a prison. And I was done serving time. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and pulled my old duffel bag from the back of the closet. My hands shook as I started to pack. I didn't bother with everything, just what mattered. A week's worth of clothes, my laptop, my toothbrush, the small wooden box where I kept the last shreds of who I used to be, old letters, a silver bracelet from my mother, the photo of me and Claire at the lake the summer before I met Caleb. I moved fast. I knew if I let myself think too long, I'd talk myself out of it. I was zipping up the bag when I heard a car in the driveway. My heart stopped. But it wasn't Caleb. It was Claire. She didn't knock. She walked straight in, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She took one look at my face, and her own eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ren," she whispered. That was all it took. The dam broke. I sank to my knees, sobbing into my hands. She came over, wrapped her arms around me, and held me like she used to when we were kids and I had nightmares. "It's okay," she murmured into my hair. "You're getting out. You're safe." I don't know how long we stayed there. Eventually, she helped me up, wiped my face with the sleeve of her sweater, and said, "Let's finish packing." Together, we moved quickly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to convince me to stay. When everything I needed was by the door, I wrote the note. I sat at the kitchen counter, the pen trembling in my hand. I thought about all the things I wanted to say, that I'd loved him, that I was sorry, that I wished he'd been the man he pretended to be. But in the end, I kept it simple. This is not love. I deserve better. Do not follow me. I set the note next to the vase of lilies he'd brought home last week, a peace offering after the last argument. I picked up my bag, feeling the weight of it in my hand, and the heavier weight lifting off my shoulders. As we stepped onto the porch, the morning sun hit my face, and for a split second, I remembered what it felt like to be free. We didn't look back. Claire drove me to her apartment across town. I watched the streets roll by, familiar and unfamiliar, all at once. I thought I would feel relief, but mostly I felt numb, like my body hadn't caught up to the reality that I was gone. When we reached her place, she carried my bag upstairs and set it in the spare bedroom. "Stay as long as you need," she said firmly. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. That first night, I lay awake in the quiet. No cameras, no footsteps in the hall, no questions about where I'd been. Just silence. It was terrifying and beautiful. In the morning, I called my manager and told her I needed some time. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until my throat closed around the words. The next day, I went to the bank and opened a new account in my name only. I called a lawyer. I blocked Caleb's number. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew he would try to contact me, but I also knew one unshakable truth. I was never going back. It has been 3 months since I walked out of that house. 3 months since I left behind the version of myself who thought love meant surrender. Some mornings, I still wake up expecting to hear his footsteps in the hall. My heart will hammer in my chest, just for a moment before I remember where I am. I'm in my own apartment now, a small, bright place overlooking the lake. The first time I turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, I cried. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. The paint was peeling in the bathroom and the carpet was old, but because it was mine. No cameras, no questions, no fear. I thought freedom would feel like fireworks, like the sky opening up. But the truth is, it came quietly, like breathing. Every day since, I've had to relearn simple things. What do I like to wear when no one is telling me? What music do I love when no one is listening over my shoulder? How do I spend my evenings when I don't have to account for every minute? Some days it feels exhilarating. Other days it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering what comes next. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd always told myself I didn't need. On the first visit, she asked me, "When did you stop trusting yourself?" I didn't have an answer, but that question unlocked something in me. Because the truth is, all the signs were there. From the beginning, there were small moments when my gut told me something was wrong. And every time, I silenced that voice. I told myself love was compromise. I told myself devotion meant putting him first. I told myself he'd change if I just loved him harder. Now I know. Love without respect isn't love. It's control. Love without trust isn't love. It's a transaction. And love that requires you to erase yourself isn't love at all. It's a cage. These days, I'm learning to listen to my instincts again. To believe that small, fierce voice that says, "You deserve better." I go for walks by the lake after work. I buy fresh flowers every Sunday because they make me happy. I started painting again, something I'd stopped because Caleb said it was childish. I even dyed my hair. A deep auburn I'd always loved but never dared to try. Every time I catch my reflection in a store window, I barely recognize the woman looking back. She is tired, yes, but she is alive, and she is free. A few weeks ago, I got an email from Caleb. Just one line. "I hope you're proud of what you've done." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because the truth is, I am proud. Proud that I left. Proud that I stayed gone. Proud that I chose myself. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, please know this. You are not weak for staying. You are not foolish for loving someone who hurt you, and you are not broken beyond repair. Leaving isn't easy. It's terrifying. It's lonely, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of that fear is something you've forgotten how to feel. Peace. And once you taste it, you will never settle for a life without it again.